All right, thank you very much. Now, I was invited to speak today, and the request said very specifically I should do it in English. That's why I'm here speaking to you in the language that we all teach. Now, let me start with this one. Could we have the next screen, please? Pronunciation seems to be the most fundamental aspect of foreign language learning, because after all, it doesn't matter how well you do grammar, vocabulary exercises, it doesn't matter how well you can read and answer reading comprehension questions, listening comprehension questions. If you mispronounce individual sounds, if you mispronounce words, if you mispronounce entire sentences, people would not understand you. And yet, sadly, the teaching of foreign language pronunciation is often neglected, not only at school, but also even in foreign language departments across our country. Of course, I'm not preaching to the right people at the moment. You are teachers with a difference. You have come here in order to learn new things, in order to develop. But think of those thousands of teachers, English teachers across our country, who teach English in the simplest way possible, sometimes neglecting speaking exercises, listening exercises, in order to focus more on grammar, tests, gymnasium tests, matura, and so on and so forth. Sometimes this is possible or even necessary, but in many, many cases, it's the same thing as neglecting the most important things. Now, needless to say, the fact that foreign language pronunciation, not just English pronunciation, is often neglected creates a vicious circle. We have some teachers with poor pronunciation skills who become the primary input and model for the next generations of learners. And that is why it is important not to forget about pronunciation and not to let the problem persist. In my talk, I'm going to talk about several issues to which I've provided the following headings. Could we have the next one? Right. First, pronunciation matters. 2, what's the problem? 3, which accent to teach? 4, how can you teach pronunciation? Something old, something new, just as weddings, something borrowed, something blue, but not in this case. 5, what not to do. And number 6, phonetician, heal thyself. Finally, go for it. I'm going to illustrate each of the parts with at least one website or YouTube video. And know that I've decided to use 2 kinds of pronunciation, notation or transcription. Examples of Polish mispronunciations use Polish spelling in round brackets, while standard English pronunciations use phonemic transcription in IPA, using the International Phonetic Alphabet, using the RP accent. Now, right, if we could just turn off Facebook and go on to these examples. I'd like you to look at the following authentic examples of mispronounced words. So we've got aria, we've got bash, we've got broad, bazi, kęt, cinema, comfortable or comfortable. We've got consider, we've got development, we've got foot, foreigner, language, linguistics, people, Poland u Poland, Polish, psychology u psychologii, kłełe, society, we've got society, we've got technology, we've got think, vegetable or vegetable, worket, and both word and world pronounced word. Now, who do you think made these errors? Children only beginning to learn English in kindergarten? Probably not, because you can see words such as linguistics. Now, the truth is that I don't want to review any details, but all these errors were made by people who should have really known better than that at the time when they made them, okay? And just rest in silence for the moment. So this might show you just that foreign language pronunciation is neglected at school to some extent. But if you don't think this is enough evidence, if you think perhaps I'm good at criticizing others and not myself, let me present you my own story. And could we get the next one? Okay, Łukasz? Okay. I had two great English teachers at my high school in Gdynia, and it was thanks to them that I managed to pass my admission exam to the program in English at the University of Gdańsk. In the fourth grade of high school, we actually covered half of Sue O'Connell's Focus on Advanced English CAE, which isn't that bad for a high school. But I honestly cannot recall doing a single pronunciation exercise, let alone learning the IPA or any other phonetic spelling system at school. I knew my English was quite advanced, but 2 weeks before I started my English program, I went to London, which was my first visit to the United Kingdom. And people in London had no idea what I was saying. They asked me to repeat everything at least once. I felt terrible when I had to repeat everything I said once, sometimes twice, and I could not communicate. That was after having learned or studied English for 13 years. When I finally arrived at the University of Gdańsk, it turned out I knew practically nothing about the following issues. Could we get the next one? Right, so this might ring a bell because these are problems that perhaps some of you also had when you arrived at your respective universities. For instance, I didn't know about the very existence of the schwa sound, vowel reduction and stressed syllables, or weak forms. I had no idea weak forms even existed. I thought they were just stressed r, e, or, o, and so on. I didn't realize how often I pronounced f or v instead of the dental fricatives. You can see the voiced dental fricative doesn't look exactly the way it should, but I hope you know which sound I mean, which symbol I have in mind. I assumed Polish RE were used in English. It turned out that, for instance, bed, bird, and bad should be pronounced differently. I had no idea at first. I thought the sound was not, I didn't realize the sound was not the same as the Polish A. So, for instance, for me, cut was the same as cut, right? I had a very vague idea of the quantitative differences between long and short vowels, as in cot and court. It took me many years to get rid of global devoicing of voiced consonants in the final position. For example, making sure bed and bet, log and lock, buzz and bus didn't sound the same. I knew nothing about the correct intonation patterns or the rhythm of the English sentence. I just took the syllable-timed Polish system for granted. I didn't know which sound went where, which syllables in long words should be stressed, and how the spelling of vowels was related to pronunciation. For example, whether the letter A should be pronounced R or A or A or the schwa sound, and so on. And also, I unconsciously confused American and British pronunciation, for example, by pronouncing a long R in words such as dog or body, so I'd say dog, body, or I would pronounce can't as can't, because I had no idea that those forms were American and not British. And apart from all those problems, I didn't know IPA. I thought I had to learn the IPA from scratch. Earlier, the phonetic spelling in dictionaries, that was something I thought was just mysterious knowledge available only to linguists and not useful to anybody else. And in a nutshell, my general English was perhaps at the CU1 level when I was 19 and beginning to study English at university, but the pronunciation problems that I had actually caused breakdowns in communication. And if my accent alone had been assessed back then, I might have been categorized as a lower intermediate learner, honestly. Why am I telling you all this? Could we have the next one? It's because pronunciation matters. I can't stress it enough. If you can paraphrase sentences blindfolded, you can scan a long text in 10 seconds and ask any question someone might think of. You can write grammatically flawless essays. But if you go to a shop in Britain, in the United States, in Ireland, and ask for apples and vegetables, people will not understand you. And if you pronounce the Polish fricative R, or Polish vowels, A, E, I, O, U, sometimes O, L, in English, most foreigners, not just native speakers of English, will judge you negatively and perhaps misjudge not just all of your English, but perhaps your general level of education or even your intelligence. It's not fair, I know, but this is what people do. This is known as accentism, and it's a well-known thing in the UK as well as elsewhere. Regional non-standard accents are often regarded as quaint, funny. Lower-class urban accents are considered ugly or objectively incorrect. Foreign accents can be downright funny. Consider this fragment of Pink Panther in which the main character is attending an American English pronunciation class. Could we get this? This is something you probably know. Okay, that's it. So, now a question for the audience. What is comical about this scene? Does it really, does it reflect the real experience of many foreign language learners? Maybe there's someone who'd like to answer that question, this question. What's funny about someone who, I mean, an American actor, of course, but someone who's French trying quite unsuccessfully to learn to pronounce English? Can anyone tell?
They do not pronounce the H sound at the beginning?
I mean, just that's one of the things that might be funny about French accent or an Italian accent or a Spanish accent in English, but that's not really my point.
It's just whatever they do, they would still use their own native phonetic system to try to at least imitate the sounds of a foreign language.
Right.
When you teach adults.
Yes. Now, so it might be difficult.
It sounds French, yeah, it sounds French, pretty much.
Yes, so but it basically shows you that learning or studying foreign language pronunciation is a struggle, right? And this can be very unnerving, very stressful for adults in particular. And you can imagine just how many people began to learn English as children or teenagers perhaps. But as adults, they realized just how inadequate the pronunciation skills were. And, well, this is a comical effect, of course. This is not a real recording of a real pronunciation class. But this is, you know, this comedy is based on life. It mirrors life to a certain extent. Many people have trouble, and even people who may be successful when studying grammar, vocabulary, reading, writing, and so on, may still find it extremely difficult to get the sounds right. So now I'm going to the next part. What's the problem? There are textbooks for foreign language teachers usually focus on just one aspect of foreign language pronunciation teaching and learning, the phonological differences between the mother tongue of the learner and the language he or she is studying. I'm not going to discuss the basic differences between English and Polish sounds and the way they're organized into phonemes or suprasegmental features. Books have been written about it, and I don't want to summarize a book. Let me mention just a few basics. So, of course, Polish and English vowels are entirely different. The only vowel we can really compare in Polish and English is the short E, as in, for instance, the Polish word taki, and in the English word taki, either the short E at the end is more or less the same, right? But no other vowel is comparable. Polish has no dental fricatives. Most consonants generally differ. And, for example, the Polish sh, ch, and so on are pronounced closer to the teeth, while the English sh, ch, and so on are pronounced even closer to the Polish sh, ch, to be honest. Stress in Polish is almost fixed on the penultimate syllable, last but one, and Polish intonation is very flat compared to English. So you can sometimes recognize a Polish speaker of English by the way they speak da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And not just, they don't know how to vary the intonation. Now, and so on and so forth, as I wrote, and the next one. Let me mention 3 other problems that I find equally important. Some students are either hard of hearing, that's the first problem, they have low phonemic hearing skills, or they suffer from speech disorders. Some students cannot pronounce, for instance, bed and bird, or bad, in a distinct way, simply because they can't hear the difference. And whereas others may not pronounce some consonants correctly, I don't know, like the dental fricatives, because their tongue, teeth, or palate does not allow them to do so. Of course, speech therapy is what can help them speak the mother tongue, but what we as English teachers can do is try to work harder and on a more individual level with such students, instead of just letting them mispronounce English in any way they like. Now, the next thing. Next, English spelling is very irregular. In many cases, the relationship between the spelling of a word is quite complex, and its pronunciation is quite complex. But let's reflect on this. Why do Polish students mispronounce work, word, world, since, field, queue, or people? Why do they say work, word, world, science, filed, queue, people? They look at the spelling. And people don't, I mean, people writing textbooks of foreign language pronunciation or teaching often forget about this. It's also, I think, it's my little hypothesis, it's also part of the reason why many Russians and Ukrainians pronounce the dental fricatives as sz, why we Polish speakers like to say td. Why? Because the letters are th, okay? And I think that if English did not use th in the spelling, or if Polish used a different alphabet, not the Latin script, then perhaps we Poles would also start by saying sz, and only then perhaps learn to pronounce the. The conclusion is clear. English courses focus on the spelling of words and not on the pronunciation, or perhaps students are not encouraged to listen to English outside the classroom. Not everywhere, of course, I'm not blaming you, but it may be the case in many, many schools. Of course, it's difficult to say to what extent you can blame teachers, course syllabi, or students themselves. But here's a question for you, that you don't need to answer aloud. Just how often do you test the pronunciation of a word in vocabulary tests? Are the spelling of the word, its meaning, and its part of speech the only things you test? Now, could we get the next one? Apart from the aforementioned issues, the most important problem is perhaps one of motivation or the lack thereof. Porzuczek, Rojczyk, and the late Professor Arabski describe the following myths and excuses that learners tend to provide. Here's my translation. You can't get rid of a foreign accent anyway. The only thing that matters is to get by. So in the original, najważniejsze, żeby się dogadać. There are so many varieties of English in the world that each and every English speaker has a slightly different accent, and yet they all manage to communicate. 4, native speakers of English are no longer the majority. We non-native speakers have a right to speak a Polish English, German English, and so on and so forth, any other national variety. Now, this kind of mindset, write the linguists, makes learners conclude they can speak however they like, as long as they are understood. And let me say in German, und hier ist der Hund begraben. Why? Because a Polish student is used to his or her classmates, and teacher and may not realize just how unintelligible his or her accent is to other people. After all, we do not study English in order to speak to other Polish people. We study it in order to communicate internationally with other non-native speakers of English, as well as, for instance, British people, Irish people, Americans, and so on. Now, to these options, I may add 3 more. Right. You can't learn to pronounce a foreign language correctly unless you begin as a child. These are some of the excuses that people provide. If you emigrate and try to speak like the locals, people will laugh at you and other Poles may accuse you of being ashamed of your nationality and so on and so forth. Only a native speaker can teach foreign language pronunciation, say some people. In fact, it's just a matter of people's imagination, I believe. People who are motivated, have some phonetic skills, can learn to pronounce a language well at any age. Think of foreign language programs, even at my university, which teach a language from scratch. Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, Norwegian, and so on. All these languages are difficult for a Polish person to pronounce, and yet young people begin at the age of 19. They begin to learn these languages from absolute nothing, and they manage to become quite advanced in just a few years. Right? As for the second opinion, British and American speakers of English tend to praise foreigners, that's my experience, who are fluent in the language instead of laughing at them. And speaking a kind of guest worker English is by no means a sign of patriotism. I believe that's my personal opinion. What matters most for immigrants is maintaining the mother tongue skills while learning a second language as best they can, right? Finally, learners who insist on being taught by native speakers do not take account of the fact that numerous non-native English speakers have also acquired a native-like accent as well as the ability to teach it to others. After all, I don't think there's any native speaker of English with us here in this room, and yet we can all pronounce English, can't we? Now, which accent to teach? The British Isles are known for the great variety of dialects and accents. Even where dialect leveling has removed typical words and structures, people still tend to use a kind of pronunciation that's typical of the town or the neighbouring larger town or city. I'd like you to listen to just the first 2 minutes, perhaps, of Siobhan Thompson from Anglophenia. Okay, I think that's quite enough. Now, she goes on to present different accents. Now, this is quite interesting, but of course she goes on to present different accents in across Wales, the north of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and even the Republic of Ireland. So something that you can actually show to your more advanced or upper intermediate adult learners. Now, so I'd like you to think of the following question. Can you teach any accent you want? And can you choose freely which accent to teach? Well, of course, there's just my answer, which is my opinion, but of course, you might have a different opinion. I think the answer is you can teach any accent as long as you are consistent, you have enough materials concerning it to teach it, and you're certain your students will be understood by foreigners, not just people from that particular place where the accent is used, but also people around the English-speaking world. And this, of course, limits your choice. You can't use an ordinary British English-focused textbook with recordings that use RP, modified RP, at the same time expect your students to pronounce English in an American way, right? So you can speak American English in the classroom, but you cannot expect your students to speak American English if you use a British English textbook. So, of course, I can't do a very good American pronunciation, but now I hope you understand what I mean. When you've got one model in the textbook, in the recordings, and you expect your students, your learners to speak according to a different model, then something's a bit confusing, isn't there? So the same is, of course, true of the Irish, Australian, or Canadian way of pronouncing things. So if you want to teach American English, you should have American materials such as recordings and textbooks. And if you work at a state school in Poland, I'm afraid the only option is RP, or more generally, an accent that is similar somehow to the British standard, such as middle-class Estray English, more or less. Even native speakers of English could be encouraged, and this might be a bit controversial to some people. I think even native speakers of English could be encouraged to speak in a manner that is closer to RP when they are teaching pronunciation. But with more advanced groups, in all other situations, they can speak in any way they like, in the local way. But when they're teaching pronunciation, well, I think they should sort of shift towards this more standard way of speaking. Why should we teach received pronunciation? Some people say it's old-fashioned, some people say it's just a bit artificial. It's true that the accent has very few native speakers. About 2% of British society, according to David Crystal, who wrote this in 2004. But it is still the best known, the most widely understood, I'd say, and the most codified accent of English. In other words, it's still a model that is used in standard textbooks and taught in phonetics courses in universities around the world. You can't change it overnight, can you? Except in places where American English prevails, such as Japan or some other places like South America, Central America. For more, all the reasons why RP is still useful, you can read Pożoczek, Rojczek, Arabski. I also contributed to that discussion a little in a paper that was published last year. Perhaps in 30 years' time, Estray English will have been established as the model for TEFL. But for the time being, RP is still an accent you can often hear on the radio, on television, not all the time, obviously, but you can still hear it on the BBC, right? Auntie Beebs, after all, they call it. In internet broadcasts, and quite importantly, in TEFL listening tasks. Now, how about the next one? Not everyone teaches foreigner standard English, however. Jade Joddle of Ingvid presents her viewers with the basics of multicultural London English. And I'd like to just play the first 2 or 3 minutes. That's okay. Right, just 5 seconds of a...
Hi everyone, I'm Jane. What we're talking about today is a London accent, and it's called Multicultural London English by linguists. But I'm going to call it real London English. It's the accent that a lot of people speak like. If you come to London and you're just walking around the street, you're going to hear this accent a lot here. And I made a different video about this accent, all the words that you can use to sound like this, all this slang stuff.
Okay, I think that's enough. Right, so once again, it's a kind of video that you can show to your more advanced and more perhaps adult learners of English. Jade Joddle, a very interesting, charismatic person, so to speak. Even though some of the things she says would make many of my colleagues outraged, because she sometimes confuses different linguistic terms and so on and so forth, and she sometimes mixes up her own ideas with some more objective, research-based linguistic facts. But it's not that important because, after all, you're not teaching linguistics when teaching pronunciation. You just want your students to pronounce things correctly. Now, needless to say, English teachers and translators, all students of English programs, in English programs, should be even more careful when studying pronunciation, because the one thing that I might have mentioned at the very beginning is that you may want to study pronunciation for different purposes. For instance, you want to go abroad in order to talk to, say, British people, or you may just want to be a tourist. So there are like 3 levels. That is simply learning English in order to get by, communicate, as a tourist, for instance. Learning English in order to work in English, or in order to use English at work. And the highest level, of course, is becoming a teacher or a translator and interpreter. And in this latter case, there's absolutely no excuse for making errors and not wanting to learn more. And so, if an English student, a student of English wanting to become a teacher, wants to learn African-American vernacular English, or Scouse, or Geordie, or you know, Cockney for pleasure, they can do so. But when it comes to the work, they need to be able to speak standard English with one of the standard accents, in practice preferably RP, the British version, or SAE, that's the standard American accent. Now, how can you teach pronunciation? Okay, so that's it. I've decided to divide this part into 2 categories: older, more traditional methods that you may have encountered at university, and perhaps more original methods involving the internet. Something old. The basics. Now, I'm not going to present anything that's, you know, a discovery, really. Just perhaps reminds you just what the most basic things are and how you can employ them in your classroom. You can simply explain how certain sounds should be pronounced and present examples. For teenagers and adults, it's a good idea to introduce the IPA so that they can become more autonomous learners. If you have access to recordings, you can do fragments of phonetics textbooks. I mean, of course, it's not always possible. And I'm not talking about teaching small children, but with adults and more advanced groups, it's perfectly fine. Including dialogues. You know, many of you may have encountered How Now Brown Cow by Mimi Ponsonby, right? All those funny dialogues. And I've actually heard of English teachers playing those dialogues to their students at high school. So this can be done. You can practice minimal pairs, even from sources with no recording, such as Reszkiewicz, another classic, correct your English pronunciation. Listening exercises, yes, we're still in the same one. When you finish the listening exercise, don't just leave it, unless your students forget it. Play it again, stopping every few sentences, every several seconds perhaps, and ask your students to read the transcription aloud. Even revision textbooks for Matura can be used in this way, not to mention textbooks preparing students for one of the Cambridge ESOL examinations or one of the Pearson examinations and so on. So this can be a nice follow-up to a listening exercise, not just listening for the sake of listening, but also listening in order to repeat what those people say. People on the recordings, of course. And reading exercises. Now, of course, I realize it's a bit dry and perhaps a bit artificial, but likewise, make sure your students not only answer the reading comprehension questions under a text, but they also know how to pronounce the words used in the text and how to use intonation. Have them read the text aloud, make sure they do it clearly and correctly. Because once again, it doesn't matter just how well all your students know that vegetables mean warzywa, if half of them or maybe all of them pronounce them vegetables, right? Dialogue writing, that's the next, oh yes, okay. When you introduce a pronunciation point, for example, the ash sound, make your students write dialogues in pairs that contain as many words with the ash sound as possible, and of course, later they read them aloud. This can be a follow-up to dialogues from pronunciation textbooks, such as How Now Brown Cow. So you might remember the dialogue from How Now Brown Cow, some of you at least, and here I've got something similar. Look, Pa, there's your cat on the mat chewing a hat. Drat, that's Granny's hat, she'll be mad, right? I mean, mad is American in this context, but never mind. So as you can see, students can play with words that repeat the same sound. And I think it's sometimes, at least, is a good idea, not just to revise vocabulary as such, but actually to pronounce, to revise pronunciation. Spelling and pronunciation. I honestly really wish I had been explained the basics of how English spelling is related to pronunciation when I was at school. And it would have saved me a lot of trouble. You can explain things to your students, allowing them to improve both skills, both spelling and pronunciation skills. For example, present the various pronunciations of the letter A. I'll give them examples. Cat, far, sofa, maze, and so on. You can also start with a phoneme and explain the different ways in which can be spelled, as like the sound in bird, bird, work, burn, and so on. You can have your students decide which words rhyme, which ones have the same vowel, which ones have different vowels. You can organize a bit of a game, for instance, stick, pieces of paper with different phonetic signs on the board or somewhere around the classroom, and then the students get a list of words and they have to match them with the particular sound. It's all possible. And you can also teach your students which word contains silent letters, ni, our, nat, num, and so on, because even advanced learners of English are capable of saying kni and gnat and numb and so on, right? Not because, once again, because they look at the spelling. Now, grammar and pronunciation. Don't forget to explain and practice intonation when teaching your students. Ask questions, use question tags, the imperative, emphatic inversion, and so on and so forth. What's the use of teaching a structure if your learners don't end up able to pronounce this correctly? I mean, perhaps they may do grammar exercises when it comes to questions, very well indeed. But if they don't use the right intonation, again, they may be misunderstood, right? Testing. Unfortunately, many vocabulary tests are limited to providing just the Polish equivalent of an English word, or the English equivalent of a Polish word, or matching a word with its definition. Why not include pronunciation? This can involve deciding which vowel sound is used in the stressed syllable, which syllable is stressed, which word is the odd word out, for example. This is again a classic. Such exercises have been done since the 1960s, probably. For instance, which is the odd one out? Road, load, boat, and broad. Okay, this is an interesting example, I think, because lots of people say broad in our country. Which word uses the same vowel as the word cat? So you don't even have to teach the IPA in order to do this exercise. Is it barn? Is it lad? Is it lard? Or is it lazy? Where's the main stress in the word controversial? Right? Because as far as I remember, we've got two pronunciations of controversy. You can also say controversy, you can say controversy. But controversial is the third syllable. And so, as I said, nothing that's very revealing, and these are just some basics that you can use in the classroom as often as possible. Now, something new. YouTube is, of course, a great source of authentic materials as well as teaching materials. In both, it's a good idea to have your students watch a video in class, repeat some of the words or sentences, sing songs and music clips with karaoke lyrics, and then watch the video again at home, and so on. In most cases, authentic materials require transcribing fragments. If you want them to use some kind of authentic material, sometimes, unfortunately, you have to sit down and write the transcription of what the text says. But it's not always something extremely time-consuming. You can do it once and use the same video for years, as long as it's on YouTube, of course. And okay, let me give you some examples. So we've got first, pronunciation tutorials as such. Tim's pronunciation workshop at BBC Learning English. Could we have a look at this one? Once again, just a minute. It's a new thing. It appeared only last year and this year. Okay, so one more second and we begin.
Hi, I'm Tim. This is my pronunciation workshop. Here, I'm going to show you how English is really spoken. It will help you to become a better listener and a more fluent speaker. You ready? Come on, follow me. Now, there's an idiom in the English language that means that something is really easy. Any idea of what it is? Well, here's a clue. You know now? Let's ask the people of London.
It's a piece of cake.
It's a piece of cake. It's a piece of cake. It's a piece of cake. A piece of cake. An expression that means that something is really easy to do, as well as meaning a piece of cake. But listen again to the words a and of. They're actually pronounced the same. What is the sound that are those words expressed?
It's a piece of cake.
It's a piece of cake. It's a piece of cake. It's a piece of cake. The words a and of are both pronounced as and then not stressed. The sound is the most common sound in the whole English language. It's so common that it even has its own name, schwa. Now, it can be difficult to hear the schwa because it's never stressed. However, it's a vowel sound that's used in many grammar words like articles and prepositions. Here are some more examples. I like it too.
Put together a capital distance.
You give it to me.
Okay, I think that's quite enough. So there are quite a few episodes and new ones are being added all the time. So this is a new thing. And I also would like to show you something else by the BBC. Say Shaw, Ship and National Voices, Consonants, Pronunciation Tips, bbclearningenglish.com. This is an older thing, but it's something that's a more classic approach towards pronunciation. Once again, just a minute of that, okay? Okay, I think that's quite enough. So once again, different sounds, different phonemes, different sounds organized as separate phonemes in English are described in the series. So it's an older series and the one with Tim is a newer one. And once again, there's nothing that can prevent you from showing, of course, I'm once again not talking to those of you who only teach very small children, but when it comes to teaching teenagers and adults, there's nothing can prevent you from doing a bit of a pronunciation lesson that actually starts with such basics. Now, of course, they're authentic materials, and now I'm going to show you something that I hope is even more interesting. One of my favorites is the Graham Norton show. And you can try Graham Norton. I mean, he's Irish, so he speaks in an Irish way, but you can try Graham Norton's interviews, other shows. Once again, that's the BBC, simply because the BBC has lots of stuff that's officially on YouTube, right? I didn't want to take any materials that were placed by private, users of YouTube, just copied from somewhere. But there are certain celebrities such as Dame Judi Dench, Martin Freeman, Stephen Fry. Why did you play the first, just once again, just a minute of the interview? Now, so that would require making your own transcription. And that's once again about voicing things, right? About animation. Okay. Okay, right, so that was just an example. Of course, there are lots of such interviews, and you know, there are some classic stars. Now, and let me show you my personal favorite, Nigella Lawson. Why? She speaks in a very standard RP way, and she also speaks very clearly. Okay, that's quite enough. Thank you very much. Now, just let's go back. And now, don't just wait with the next one. Don't give me the next one yet. Now, a question for you: which actors and other famous people, apart from the royal family and the Queen, of course, are the best models of received pronunciation in your opinion?
Tom Ward.
Yes.
Tom Ward.
I hardly know him actually. Yes, a little. Yes.
Okay, so he's one of the main characters in Silent Witness, playing, I think, Harry Cunningham.
Mm-hmm. I might have seen an episode or two. Yes.
Benedict Cumberbatch. Oh, yes.
Okay. Especially as the dragon in The Hobbit, right? Yes, a very RP character. Any other ideas? Jude Law? Wouldn't be so sure about that. And you know what? I asked my students the same question, and in 3 groups, believe it or not, the very first answer was Sean Connery. And I said, well, wait, what? Yes, he's posh, but first he's Scottish, and second, he has a speech disorder, right? That's why he pronounces shit instead of sir. And he has nothing to do with RP whatsoever. Okay, now, so here's my personal list of favourites. John Cleese, Daniel Craig, Benedict Cumberbatch, Dame Judi Dench, Martin Freeman, Stephen Fry, Hugh Grant, Elizabeth Hurley, Penelope Keith, Nigella Lawson, Joanna Lumley, Sir Ian McKellen, Dame Helen Mirren, Jennifer Saunders, Dame Maggie Smith, and of course, Peppa Pig. Right. And some other people close to RP, Dawn French, Keira Knight, Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson. I'm not 100% sure if a phonologist classified them as RP speakers, probably not, but they still speak in a very clear, lucid, and more or less standard way. Now, what does this show? It means that this is a very good thing because you can ask your students, once again adults, once again I'm giving you ideas for teaching adults, you can ask the adults that you teach, especially more advanced ones, more autonomous learners, to choose a British celebrity they like and simply watch as many things with them, in English of course, as possible, and try to speak, so they can try to speak in the same way, right? I used to, when I was a student at university, I used to like Stephen Fry, and I used to listen to his podcasts a lot. I mean, towards the end of my English program, because at the beginning there was hardly any internet, to be honest. But yes, he was my favorite, and when it comes to women, as I said, Nigella Lawson, and so yes, I can recommend this kind of thing. For instance, you can tell your students, choose your favorite British celebrity, one of these people probably, preferably, and try to speak like that person. Now, of course, if they choose Billy Connolly, for instance, that will be a bit of a problem because he speaks in a very Scottish way, doesn't he? Or even Graham Norton, as you could hear, R and so on. That's Irish English. Okay, something new that's also, apart from teaching pronunciation, you can also present bits of popular British culture to your students in this way. And when showing, for instance, a program, I don't know, like the Great British Bake Off, or Nigella Lawson's Nigelissima, or any other show with Nigella Lawson, you can kill two birds with one stone. You do, for instance, Matura Żywienie, you show them Nigella Lawson, or, you know, someone else who's famous for her or his cooking shows. Not Gordon Ramsay, probably, he doesn't speak in a very standard way, but Nigella Lawson definitely. And you can teach some cooking vocabulary, but also pronunciation at the same time. Now, dialogues and role-playing. Find a piece of comedy, for example, about British aristocracy, and ask your students what they think about the accent and whether they find it classy, posh, funny, pretentious, and so on. Ask them to write a similar dialogue, for example, a scene from Downton Abbey, a day at Buckingham Palace, and so on. And also, don't be afraid of letting your students exaggerate the accent. If they try to speak in a very queeny, royal way, there's nothing wrong about it as long as they sort of practice their pronunciation. Because they will not necessarily end up speaking in this exaggerated way, obviously, right? But they can at least have a bit of fun. And especially these days when, you know, some British aristocrats or, you know, all these internet memes with Milord in Polish, right, are quite popular. So here's Tracy Ullman's impression of Dame Maggie Smith. Again, just a minute, right? This is again the... Mów głośniej. Nie da się. Okay, now that's a very silent video, I'm afraid, but you can once again, Tracy Ullman has done a few new series of a new show, and she can do any accent perfectly well. I wish I could show you her impression of Princess Margaret, but unfortunately I only found it on someone's private channel, so that was basically an unofficial copy that someone made, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to propagate the use of such videos. And okay, so why don't you go on to the next one. Now, there are talking dictionaries. Even adult students are often unaware of the fact that you can actually enter an online dictionary and listen to the pronunciation. Show them sources such as Diki.pl, Cambridge Dictionaries, or howdyousay.com, okay? And there are some blogs, for instance, the Polish blog Icebreaker has, for instance, an exercise in pronouncing the ing ending that many students, even advanced learners of English who are Polish, tend to pronounce ink instead of ing, right? Okay, we're not going to read this, so just you can turn back to the... And no, don't click this last one. My own blog also has one pronunciation exercise, but not more, because I only started doing this. What not to do? Now, there's one thing I'd like to discuss in detail before I just do the rest of my talk quickly, so as not to take too much time. What not to do? There are several things that you shouldn't do, I believe. First and foremost, English teachers should not pretend that pronunciation doesn't matter. Let me give you a typical example. There's a group of students, say teenagers or children, and one student pronounces apple as apple. The teacher corrects the student, but the student says the next sentence and says apple again. Then there's another student who, once again, like there's, I don't know, like there's a dialogue about your favorite fruit. And another student says apple. What the teacher often does is simply turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to that, so as to just let the students continue so that they can go on to different things before the lesson is over. And that's unfortunately how many errors become fossilized, okay? Because a teacher may simply give up too quickly. And another problem is allowing all manner of errors in groups of children or adult beginners. For instance, let them speak however they like, they will learn the pronunciation later, and that unfortunately is a problem, because that's how some people end up realizing after many years that they've been pronouncing things incorrectly, right? Just as I realized at the age of 19 in London that people could not understand me. Okay. And the next problem is transcribing English pronunciation in Polish. I think this is a very bad thing, and I've written about this in our group as well. For example, what do you do with, if you want to use Polish spelling, what do you do with here? Can you say here, 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 right? How can you transcribe that? How about loving? Loving, 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 loving. How about over? All these, you know, we've got all these options. How about three? Is it free, or is it three, or is it three? Right? How do you mark the schwa? How do you mark long vowels? How do you mark the ash sound, and so on? And the next problem, of course, is never devoting entire exercises to pronunciation. That I think is also often a problem because of a lack of time, because of the fact that, for instance, pronunciation doesn't matter as much as it should in Matura. The fact that, the kind of gymnasium final examination has no oral component at all. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Now, phonetician, heal thyself. Let me simply say that pronunciation teaching, once again, is often neglected at school, not always, but often. And foreign language departments, training teachers sometimes allow quite rather poor performance students to pass their phonetics component and go on, just not to cause them trouble. And that unfortunately leads to a vicious circle. It's not just my opinion, this is also written by Ms. Baran-Wulcash. Some students even cry in their phonetics classes, believe it or not. Adult people arrive at university, they start their phonetics classes, and they feel so frustrated by the fact they can't pronounce things correctly, they've been pronouncing things wrong for years, that they even cry, some of them. Okay? Another problem is that oral matura cannot be taken into account in the admission process at the universities in Poland. So if someone takes their matura in English and Polish and another subject, and they pass it well enough, we cannot take, we people working in universities cannot take into account the oral part. And of course, there are some language myths such as, I can't go to England on a regular basis and I won't learn anything here in Poland. So many people actually give up too quickly. They believe, they find excuses, and they give up too quickly. They don't want to improve enough. They believe they can't improve. Now, so what can you do? What you can do is, first, the most radical solution, find a phonetics teacher and start taking private tuition, or even go to Great Britain or another English-speaking country that interests you and attend a course there. But of course, it's not the only one. Of course, you can listen to the radio. I mean, you teachers, right? You still want to improve something. You can simply listen to the radio in English as often as possible. Not Radio Polonia, probably. Okay, Polskie Radio za granicy, but native speakers. Right? You can listen to podcasts, you can watch videos in English, you can watch TV in English with subtitles or without subtitles, and so on and so forth. You can, as I said, you can choose your favorite, celebrity, and you can even buy a textbook of phonetics and study it on your own. You can record yourselves and play your recordings back in a few days and try to see and listen to the mistakes that you have done and the right things you've done. And so you can, of course, decide, you can read texts aloud, you can record yourselves, you can listen to how you speak, decide which sounds you need to work on. And the next one, simply go for it. Studying the pronunciation on your own. Don't believe that once you have finished your phonetics, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you're perfectly fine. Nobody's pronunciation is ever perfect, but that doesn't stop you from trying. Teach as much pronunciation as possible, included in your class, included in your lessons. Correct your students' errors, don't neglect that part. Do it in a fun way, as I said, you know, writing those dialogues with the same sound over and over again. Writing those funny dialogues about Downton Abbey or Buckingham Palace, or I don't know, maybe just life in Britain. And make sure your students know how to speak so that foreigners can understand them. Make sure your students are not frustrated when they go to an English-speaking country for the first time and it turns out that people cannot understand them, okay? So when your students go abroad, they won't be asked to fill in gaps or paraphrase sentences. They'll have to speak in a way that will allow others to understand them, okay? Here are my references. Here's the list of, yes, the next one. Okay, here are the YouTube videos, and the final one is, okay, ostatnie. Thank you very much.